All right, we are live with Alex Cranmer. Alex, thank you for joining us. I'm going to give a little bit of a slight introduction, and then I'm going to give a little bit of kind of context for this conversation, and then I'm going to let you really, really dive deep on who you are and what you're all about. But first and foremost, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Happy to be here.
So here's how we know each other. This is a roundabout deal. But I have a good friend from childhood, kid I knew, Andrew Wild. Shout out to Andrew Wild. Grew up with. First knew him when I was like 3 or 4 years old, and we went to grade school together. We're friends sort of throughout our young, sort of youth. Lost track of him. He was a big ski racer. He got in touch with me somewhat out of the blue some weeks ago and said, "You've got to interview my friend Alex for the podcast because he does this really unique line of work with military weapons and so on and so forth." So we sort of connected the dots there. You and Andrew had gone to one of the ski academies actually in Vermont together. We also have another mutual friend in common, but more interesting still was the fact that I knew of you already as the firearms expert from the show Pawn Stars, which I've watched here and there over the years and have seen your face there. So it was this weird serendipity. But as we dug in together and as I got to know a little bit more about your work, you are part of a family business that your dad started, IMA, International Military Antiques, and we're going to learn a little bit more about the history of that. But what's really interesting to me is you are widely seen, and you and your dad, I guess you would say too, are widely seen as really the experts on military weaponry, certainly in the United States. And I'm sure there's a few other experts out there scattered around the world, but you've reached this authoritative place, so much so that Hollywood leans on you all to outfit movie sets for military weapons, so on and so forth. So I'm doing a terrible job trying to explain who you are and what you do. So I'm going to let you explain who you are and what you do. But mostly I just want to say thank you. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And you may be the most successful TV and movie star that I've yet to have on the podcast. So I appreciate that.
I don't even consider myself at all any type of celebrity. I'm not really. Occasionally I get recognized, but it's just usually from gun fanatics who recognize me from being on Pawn Stars because I've been doing it 12 years now, so about 140 episodes, which is
incredible. Wild. Yeah. Yeah. And wild in a sense, so not to interrupt, but I'm going to. Wild in the sense too that on a mainstream television show, you get to do some shooting, you get to have different weapons. Like that's somewhat atypical in, I don't know, from a quote unquote reality TV show, if you want to call it that. That is a piece of the narrative. Like that doesn't really happen a lot. So that's pretty unique.
That's true. And actually, before I joined Pawn Stars, maybe I think in 2014, and they had already been on the air for 5 years, so I was already watching it. I liked it, and the expert before me, I enjoyed him, and I was always like, that's so cool that he gets to go out and shoot these old guns that a lot of people may collect, but rarely do they wind up shooting them.
Right.
And so when the opportunity came up, I was like, yes, I'd want to do that because I get to fire so many different varieties of antique weapons, going back to wheel locks, 1600s. Actually, 1580 was the oldest gun I've ever fired.
That's wild.
All the way up to 1898 because that's the federal deadline to what's an antique legally.
Right.
And the pawn shop will only deal in antique guns. And I pretty much only deal in antique guns as well. But that's a solid, almost 400 years of firearms technology. And I've shot more or less every kind of firearm, pretty close, but pretty much every kind of firearm. So wheel lock, matchlock, early flintlocks, percussion, some wild things that people invented that worked or didn't work, plus
Right.
all the different kinds of ordnance. So cannons and howitzers and knee mortars and the list just goes on. And the more that I've done it, I mean, I will sometimes turn on the television and catch an old episode of Pawn Stars, and the gun will come in. And I'll go, oh, that's a neat gun. I wonder what that's going to be. And then I come in, and I'm like, oh, I don't even remember doing that.
Right.
So yeah, it was it's a wild journey to where I've gotten because I grew up in this business. My father, when my father was 19 years old, he was born and raised south of London. And he he started this business when he was 19, and he's completely self-made. And so I grew up around it, and I had no interest in it whatsoever.
Mm.
Um, and even though I was around it and I kind of started to learn things about it, I never thought it would be a career. And the way in which I sort of backed into it, I think has made me appreciate it much more. And the fact that I have been doing it now for 25 years is very much because I didn't get into it until my late 20s.
Hmm.
Had I been into it, I think as a kid more so, I think I would have burned out on it in a way.
Yeah. I'm curious. So for your dad and your dad's start, was he, I would imagine he came at this from an interest in history. Was that his entree? And then how did he actually at that young age? I mean, 19 is pretty young to really start a business in the space. Like, how did that even come to be
Yeah.
a reality for him?
So he didn't really have a choice. He grew up in a wealthy family south of London, wealthy enough where it wasn't quite, what's that show on PBS with I can't, not Gosford Park. Anyway, I can't
Oh,
think of it.
not
Yeah,
Down
it
Abbey.
wasn't Downton Abbey
Right.
wealthy, but it was pretty wealthy. I mean, servants wealthy.
Mhm.
And his mother was the first woman in England, so I'm told, who had a surgery to try to correct a stroke, which is
Hmm.
not something, a badge of honor you want, because at that time in the early 50s, medical surgery on strokes was not perfected. And because of that, she really wasn't capable of caring for him, even with the servants. And so they sent him to boarding school when he was 8 years old.
Hmm.
And he told me that the favorite thing about boarding school is they would have a movie night, usually once a week, and they would play war movies.
Hmm.
And he loved them. And he would be, front row for all the movies.
Right.
And he started to really develop a passion for history at a young age. And he started reading, books and novels about history and Blackbeard and, buried treasure. And he got really into it. And his father had a collection of guns and edge weapons, and his father was a competitive shooter, and actually was a rifleman in the Olympic Games for England, as was his older brother. My
Hmm.
dad never did, or never competed. So they had this small collection of about 300 swords and guns, and then my grandfather developed lung cancer and died very quickly.
Hmm.
And it came out upon his deathbed that he had basically been bankrupt and was just living like, basically had sold everything or taken loans on everything, that they lost everything.
Hmm.
They lost everything to the point where there was nowhere to live. The people they owed debts to basically took the furniture, the cars, everything. And my father's brother was only his half brother, and he was of no help. They were not close. So my dad wound up having to take care of his mother, who was unfit. And they moved into a small 1-bedroom house in a little town south of London called Godston. And the only thing the attorney for the family could protect was this collection of swords and guns. And he basically said, no, no, that's Christians. And so the debtors couldn't get at it.
Hmm.
And my dad lived there for about a year. He was working at a cake factory, and by cake factory as a salesman, basically like today, like Hostess cakes that you see
Hmm.
it was sort of like that equivalent. And he was working as a salesman. It was not, he wasn't enjoying life. He was 19 years old at this point. And he thought, I'm going to sell this collection, and I'm going to buy a 2-bedroom apartment so I can go on dates and bring girls home and not have my mother there.
Right.
And the best way to do that, because he had grown up loving this stuff, I mean, he knew a lot about it, but he had never been a dealer. He knew that there was a gun show in Germany, so he shipped the stuff over to Germany, went over, set up a stand, was there for 4 days at the gun show, and realized that the stuff that he liked that was easy to find in England was harder to find in continental Europe. And again, this is the early 60s, 1963,
Hmm.
64. And he did trading at the show and made more in cash than he would in an annual salary. And he increased the size of his collection. He brought the stuff back to England and realized that the stuff that was in continental Europe could be sold for more in England. So he
Mhm.
started to see, hey, if I start buying stuff in continental Europe, selling it in England, and doing the reverse, I'm going to make money.
Mhm.
And that's how the business started.
Hmm.
And so when I was a kid, he was doing that my whole life. And the business started in our garage, and or not started, but the US side of the business was held in our garage. And he was importing stuff from all over the world to the United States. And at the time, it was mostly surplus. Um, Rifles, bayonets, things like that, and he would sell them in a newspaper called the Shotgun News. And he had
Mhm.
these little cartoon ads that people who collect will remember from the 80s and the 90s. And that's how the business got started. But when I decided to join it in 2004, I was on a different trajectory. I basically just joined it because I needed a part-time job, and I didn't want to work as a waiter or a bartender in New York City because I had
Mhm.
gone to acting school. I mean, I went to
Mhm.
college, and then I went actually to acting and got a master's in fine arts and acting. And I didn't want to be a waiter or a bartender because I had friends who were actors doing that and they hated it. And I thought, you know what? I'll work with my dad and I will build a website, not really knowing what I was talking about, but I knew enough to know that his business was cool and that selling through a catalog would be not as good as selling online.
Right.
This is early days of e-commerce. And so he employed me. He paid me very little money the first 2 years, or first year especially. Most of the money just went to the website build. And I hired, coders. I didn't know how to code it, but I knew how I thought people who would want to shop online. And again, this is very early e-commerce. So Amazon was around, but they weren't huge yet. And not most companies didn't have e-commerce websites. Um, and so when I started, I had to take photographs of everything he was selling. And then, I'd take photographs of uh, what, anything, a Winchester 1873 rifle. And I'd say, okay, Dad, well, what is this? Well, it's a Winchester 1873 rifle. Okay, well, here's the serial number. All right, what does that mean? And well, do you know what year it's made? And how do I find that? And because I had to do that with thousands of items and
Mhm.
photograph them and understand them, and then write up their descriptions, and then understand like bore condition and timing and all these things about firearms and antique guns that I had no idea about, but I knew what they were because I grew up around it, but I just didn't know the technical terms. I basically had an internship. It was basically boot camp for me for the first 4 or 5 years of getting all of the inventory processed in order to sell it online. And of course, e-commerce exploded and the business doubled in size within 2 years, and then doubled again, and then doubled again. And I remember my dad's accountant coming in one day. I'd probably been here 3 years. And he said, whatever you're doing, you keep doing it because last January beat the entire year 2 years ago. I said,
Really?
what? He's like, yeah, keep doing it, kid. And I was like, okay. And, and that's how I started to. I mean, that was the best way in, because even though it was my dad's business, I didn't take anybody's job. I
Right.
wasn't handed anything. I completely created something, and now the business has been mine for over 10 years. I mean, my dad still works here, but he's just more or less retired and comes to the office,
Mhm.
and it's completely transformed how this business is done. And so I view us really as an e-commerce company that sells really old, cool things. And we don't just sell antique guns. I mean, we sell anything. What we say is we sell military antiques. So the broader definition is militaria and antique guns. But if you think about it this way, anything a soldier would have used from about ancient Rome all the way up to more or less the Gulf War in the 90s. I mean, we even
Mhm.
have some Afghanistan stuff. So that could be a helmet, a sword, a gun, a vehicle like a Jeep or a motorcycle, airplane parts and gauges, field gear like canteens. I mean, maps, flags, propaganda posters,
Mhm.
all of these different types of things. And when you think about it from a business perspective, and especially a fulfillment perspective, we're shipping things that are $30 and weigh an ounce, and things that are $250,000 and need to be delivered by freight,
Right.
like a
Right.
Gatling gun. So I got a boot camp not only in military history and antique guns, but also in how to run a business, and specifically how to run an e-commerce business.
Well, and how I would say too, I would imagine also how to scale a business, like because you are going all of a sudden from what I imagine was a fairly manageable stream of traffic, right? Like, so your dad's getting orders by phone or however
Mm-hmm.
he's taking orders, and he can kind of incrementally say, okay, I'm going to package this, ship it, and I'm going to take the next call or what, not
Yep.
putting sort of crude terms, but then whereas with e-commerce, you could just be inundated. And then of course you have to scale all of the infrastructure around.
Yep. Yeah, I
All of
mean
that.
that's a completely astute observation. So when I first got here and we turned the website on, they were still taking phone orders and writing them down on a pad, and then the pad every couple of hours would go into a secretary who would type them out on 3-sheet carbon copy paper. And then that paper, one would get ripped and go in the file. The other two would go out to shipping. One would get ripped and go in the customer box. The other one would go to the UPS computer where they'd type it all back in again. And I was like, there has to be a better way.
Right.
And that was one of the big things. We did the website. Then I had to find a back end system that could basically talk to the website and pull all that information into our accounting system, our inventory system. Well, we didn't have an inventory system, like the inventory system, and then the shipping system. And so that's what, ultimately became, now it's very standard, right? But back in 2004, I was, beating my own path through that jungle. And it worked, but I remember my wife for a few years worked at Google in New York City. And they were, one of the things she said after she got the job, she's like, this is great. They give you free breakfast. They give you free lunch, and they give you free dinner. I was like, that's awesome. She's like, yeah, but in order to get free breakfast, you have to be there before 8 a.m. I was like, oh, that's smart. And she's like, in order to get dinner, you have to stay till after 6. I was like, that's really smart. They're keeping their people there. So one of the things we still do is when we get blasted around Black Friday. It's the only sale of the year we do. And it's not even a huge sale, but people wait for it. And so we do free lunch all the way through Black Friday, those couple of weeks, because I'm like, this is smart. Nobody has to leave now. They can all come in, have a free lunch, and they can all go back out and start processing orders, because the orders are, stacked up, and people want their stuff on time, but
so wild to think about, like, the evolution of the business. I want to go back for a second to your dad. So as he made that, initial move to go to I think you said Germany, to go to mainland Europe to do some sales, and then vice versa to bring some stuff back. Did he have an area of focus, or was it kind of like, I'm just going to look at the market, see what people seem to want, and I'm going to adjust according to that? Or did he have a niche?
Well, I think the niche was mostly around military issued equipment, and it was mostly around weapons. So it traditionally had been firearms, a lot of machine guns. Now, not working machine guns that would be cut up and brought into England, because he had all the licenses for that, and then processed in order to be imported to the United States. So, and then also, bayonets for different rifles, Mauser bayonets, and I mean, hundreds of different types and styles. It was not what I would call one-of-a-kind items. So it was mostly surplus stuff. And in the 80s and 90s, you had these governments throughout Eastern Europe, throughout North Africa, even in Asia, that had pretty large depots of surplus weapons that were from World War II or the Cold War that were obsolete. They weren't using them. Instead of throwing them out or putting them in the scrap. So instead of throwing them out or putting in the scrap, they were selling them to wholesalers. And my dad was one of the primary ones in Europe. And then he realized that the best market wasn't England, it was actually the United States. And so he found a guy in the United States to partner with. They're still in business, Sarco. They still sell gun parts. In fact, the guy who runs Sarco introduced my dad to my mom.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that's why we're in New Jersey, actually, because Sarco used to be based here, and that's where my mom and my dad met, and that's where they had me. And so, for our company, we would be better off in some other states for different reasons, but this is where our families are, so we're staying.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would say his focus is always military. Military-based weapons, but then he would get into other things like, uh, I mean, all different types of different military paraphernalia and some of the cartoons are really funny, like wine cans from France. And they had military wine cans in the 70s, and they're really cool looking. And he had piles of those. And then he got a bunch of World War I British Brody helmets. And, there were thousands of them. And I remember them as a kid, and they had to take all the paint off, and because they were flaking, and then had them redone, and then sold those. And he paid $1 each and would sell them in his catalog for $30 each, right? And that was the business. And the business was buying lots of quantity for as little as possible, and then selling it over a long time.
So that's okay. So this leads me to my next question, because this is really when we start to talk about numbers, and this is a little bit of research I did, and my numbers may be off here, but there was a 55,000 piece acquisition from Nepal, 100,000 bayonets from Egypt, 32,000 World War II helmets out of Finland and Estonia.
Yeah,
that's crazy numbers.
Crazy, yeah.
And then so you're. And I'm fascinated by your dad's kind of either knowledge or insight into the business, or sort of bravado or courage in doing this. But so he says, okay, I'm going to buy 55,000 pieces from Mar, or I'm going to buy 100,000 bayonets, and then is the model then I'm going to turn these around and sell them onesie twosies, or is it like I'm going to figure out a way to get rid of 10,000 of these at a time? And if there is that 10,000 unit or piece sale, like who is buying this stuff? Like, how does it work?
So he was a direct to consumer. That's what we call it now. He wasn't a B2B. He was a B2C.
Right.
So his vision was to buy as much as you could, buy it all. Don't let anyone else have it. If you're the only one who has it, then you can just sell it.
Set the price.
And he would retail it. And that was the model for forever. The problem is, and so the 3 deals that you mentioned, I was part of 2. Well, I was basically part of 2 of them. I was part of 2, and I was responsible for the final one. But the deal in Nepal, I think, is probably what put him really on the map. And that occurred. That was finally landed in 2003. And what had happened is, so the turn of the 20th century, so I'm talking about the late 1800s and then the 1900s, the British East India Company and Great Britain obviously were colonists of India. And to the north was Nepal, and to the north of them was China. And China was always something that they wanted to have a buffer for. And they fought this brief little war with Nepal at one point. And Nepal really was fighting nobody, so it didn't last. And essentially, the United Kingdom gave Nepal all of their archaic weapons as a sort of like goodwill gesture. And it was so archaic, things from the East India Company, like Brown Bess muskets that would have been used, their equivalent were used in the 1770s and all the way up to the 1820s during the Revolutionary War and the Napoleonic Wars. And then things like 1853 Enfields, which would have been used in the American Civil War, and then moving on to things like Snider rifle conversions. Those are in the 1860s, and then moving on to the Martini Henry rifle, which was the first breech-loading military rifle used by the British government, by the British military. And those were developed in 1871 all the way up to the 1890s, and then they were replaced by the Lee Metford, and then you get into the SMLE range. So Nepal didn't do anything with them. They had the Gurkha regiments, who still serve today in the English army, and they're some of the finest fighters in the world. But other than that, they just sat there. So they literally piled all of these guns like cordwood in an old palace in the middle of Kathmandu, Nepal, locked the door, and left them.
Really?
Yep. And they sat there for over 100 years, and the roof would leak, and mice were in them, but they had coated them in what we call yakling, essentially like yak fat, like some kind of petroleum or animal-based grease that preserved them pretty darn well.
Huh.
And in the late 1960s, my father had a friend from boarding school whose family was an antique dealer, and I can only remember that I think the guy's name was Angus, and he happened to bump into him on a street in London, and Angus said, "Oh, hi, Christian. What are you up to?" And he goes, "Well, I'm doing this thing with, antique military stuff and old guns. If you ever see any old guns, let me know." He goes, "Funny you should say that. I was just in Nepal looking at furniture, and there's an old palace in Kathmandu. You should go check it out. There are the thousands and thousands of guns there." And it triggered something to my dad. And he goes, in the 60s, like, I don't think Nepal even had a car until the 1950s. Literally, I don't think they even had a car in that country until the 1950s. And so it's just like, it's like an Indiana Jones story. Like, who's going to go to Nepal and get tens of thousands of old guns out? So my father started writing letters to the Nepalese government and importantly, the Nepalese military. "I'm Christian Cranmer. I want to buy your guns.
Right.
Please write me back." Nothing happens. And I think that was, late 60s, early 70s. Anyway, rumors start spreading in the late 90s about the guns in Nepal are going to come up for sale. And the military is going to do a blind auction. And all of the large importers, Century Arms up in Vermont, all around the world, the Germans, my dad, they're all on it. And you got to go evaluate it, what you want to pay, take a look, and write a bid. And that's it. There's no counter bids. It's one bid. And so my father goes to Nepal. I wasn't working for him then, but I was, obviously his son. I remember him telling me, "Well, I'm getting the biggest loan I can possibly get. I'm getting a second person, his Indian business partner who used to make our reproductions of stuff for movies and things. He's going to help us, and I'm mortgaging the house again."
Really?
Well, that was his plan.
Yeah.
And anyway, he won the bid. So he wins the bid, and I think it was about $3 million for 55,000 antique guns, plus 180 bronze cannons, plus 20,000 kukris, which are the Gurkha fighting blades, which are incredible knives, and some other miscellaneous things. And he's sitting in the office with the general of the military, and the general says, and my father says, "Did I really have the highest bid?" He said, "Barely." He said, "Okay." He goes, "But that's not why we chose you." He goes, "Why?" And he gets up, leaves the room, comes back, and puts down a letter my father had written in 1971 asking them to buy the guns.
Really?
Yep.
And this was in the 2000.
This was in 2000. Well, yeah, 2003.
Golly, that's amazing.
They had kept a file on who wanted these guns, and they recognized his name.
Huh.
And yeah, so I went over just to check it out. I was there a couple of weeks, and the scale of it was phenomenal. It was 32 40-foot ocean containers full, shipped. They had to truck them down through the Himalayas all the way to the port in India. They had to get on all the ships. They were split. 20 came to the port in New York, even though we're in New York. 20 went to Seattle and had to be trucked across the country. And then we have a warehouse at 25,000 square feet, barely fit it all in. And then they started selling them. And we
And did you
still
have to go
them.
through every piece, like piece by piece by piece?
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were, so for instance, Martini Henry Mark II short lever rifles. We knew there were, because we had done counts in Nepal and they were crated, so we knew there were 12,000 or whatever. I'm making a number up.
Sure.
But each one is slightly different. So do you sell them one at a time? Well, no, he wasn't set up like that because he's selling them in a catalog. So you sell the Mark II, but then there's a Mark IV. So that was a different variant. Then there was the Brown Bess. Then there was the Snyder rifle and the 1853 rifle. And there were Brunswick rifles and all these different things. So he's setting them up in the catalog and selling them that way. And 55,000 guns later, we're down to about 5,000. So it's been 22 years. And that's interesting. That, and then what you mentioned about the German helmets, we literally got we got an email in 2010, I believe, from a guy in Finland saying, I have 30,000 German World War II helmets. Would you like to buy them? And I thought, yeah, right. So I emailed back and said, please send a sample. So 2 days later, he FedExes a box with 2 helmets in it. And they are German helmets from World War II, but they're just a little different. And I'm looking at these like, what are these? And I say, well, how much do you want for them? And he says a number for each of them that's lower than what we're currently having them reproduce for in India. And we're selling 400 or 500 reproductions of these a year. He's got 30,000. We're selling them. We started with like doing them just as novelties, and then some film productions bought them, and then we're just selling them on Amazon and eBay. They don't have markings on them. They're just like a reproduction shell. Yeah. And so he sends these things, and we start looking at them. I'm like, they're not marked on the inside. They don't have the codes like German World War II helmets, but they're identical in shape and weight and silhouette. So more research reveals that at the end of World War II, Germany's prevented from making anything to do with military production. And so we're like, well, how did this happen? So in 1955, Finland, who very much appreciated the German support in World War II because they hated the Russians, and the Russians continually fought the Finns, and the Germans were the only ones who stepped in to try to stop the Russians. So the Finns had this sort of affinity to the Germans. And so in 1955, Finland needed to basically retool their infantry units and said, we need 50,000 helmets. We want to order these helmets from Germany because the Germans were known for engineering and the helmet design. I mean, there's a reason that the current U.S. helmet looks a little bit like the German World War II helmet because the actual design of it is superior. And they essentially went to the UN and said, could Germany supply them? Now, if you remember, one of the big reasons Hitler came to power is because the treaties after World War I were overly punishing Germany. They put their economy into a terrible depression. And so it bred this nationalism, right? That created the most evil regime the world's ever known. So they went, you know what? Yes, you can buy these helmets from Germany. We're going to let them have a little industry. They're just helmets. They're not missiles. Right? Go ahead. So they did, but they only made about 40,000. There were about 10,000 that they just refurbished that were sitting around from World War II. But the same company, one of the same companies named Hans Romer, made them again on the same machines. They made a couple of variations, and then the Finns put their own liners in. So so we realized what these are, and I said, Dad, I think we can do this. He's like, there's 30,000. I was like, I know, but like, let's go check them out. So we fly to Helsinki, my dad and I. The guy who has them is this really sweet guy named Willie, who has a gun shop in the middle of Helsinki. He shows up at the airport with his wife and 2 kids, takes us to dinner. I'm like, this is not what I thought this was going to be.
Right.
And he goes, okay, the next morning we'll see you at the ferry terminal. I'm like, ferry terminal? He's like, well, the helmets aren't here. Too much to store them in Finland. They're in Estonia. So we go to Tallinn, Estonia. We get out. We're picked up by these 2 guys in 2 different Hummers, who are like massive dudes with tattoos. Right. They're Russian. We driven out towards the Russian border, and we get to this area that's like trash and recycling and warehouses, like an hour east of Tallinn, like getting very close to the Russian border.
Right.
And we get into this warehouse, and there is all these cars. And then there are these stacks and stacks of pallets of helmets. And I take out my phone to do pictures. And no pictures. And I'm like, Willie, I have to take some pictures. I've got to go up into those helmets, and I have to see, like, what are these things? I want to see if there's codes on some, because those are 10 times more than ones that out. And he goes, okay, you could take the pictures, but not of the cars. And I'm like, oh, yeah, not of the cars. I'm not going to take a picture of the cars, because the cars are not there legally. These are American and high end. Yeah. So that was, and it wasn't Willie. Willie was just storing them there, right, but that's where he was storing them. So I go up, I scatter around, I pull out helmets. About 1/10 are coded, which means they really were German World War II production. The rest are these sort of post-war made Finnish blend helmets, which are still good and collectible, but we sell them for $50 retail, which is great, because that's more than double what we paid for them. Mm-hmm. And we do the deal. And the guy ships over 2 containers of 30,000 helmets, and we sell about 8 a day.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's nuts. We're almost out of them. Like we're down to like our last 7 or 8 pallets, and we had hundreds of pallets of these things. But
it's
then
No, I was just going to say, it's so fascinating that like this appetite in this market exists. It's the same way I always feel about, this is going to be a really terrible parallel, but when you hear about like, I don't even know why this came to, I'm embarrassed to even say this out loud, but I'm going to say it. When you hear about like the wildlife, like how many like tigers and lions and stuff people own in like Florida. Yeah. It's like, well, where are they all? Like, who are these people that own all these lions and tigers? It's the same thing. It's like, who's buying all? Like, I don't see them in people, but clearly there's a market.
Well, this stuff is really collectible, and so I'm just going to note like a major shift. So when I came in and started doing the website, these massive caches of surplus military stuff from World War II or earlier were starting to evaporate. And now today, they're probably pretty much all gone. And because we have a website, we were able to transition in about 2008, 2009, 2010 to more one-of-a-kind pieces. So that's pretty much what we've been specializing in for about 15 years. And so more higher end pieces. I got one recently, kind of in the spirit of this podcast, because you're fishing and hunting, right? Like wing shot.
Yeah.
So I have this model 1893 Winchester. I just got it last week.
That's awesome,
right?
I have one of those in my basement, actually. As a matter of fact,
you do. All right. Well, this one's special because I don't know if you can see it. It's engraved here. There's a name on it.
I can see that at all. But yeah. I can't.
Okay. Well, I'll read it to you.
Okay.
So it says Captain E.E. Stubbs, champion wing shot of the world. And it also has a letter from the Cody Museum. And what's really crazy about this, and I've seen a lot of Colt and Winchester letters, I have never seen one that's actually has that it was engraved at the factory. And it says that exact line right here. So this is a special order 1893. And it was shipped on January 8th, 1896. Well, captain, and I don't actually think he was in the military. I think that was a self-given rank.
Right.
This guy was one of the best trick shooters in the 1880s and 1890s.
Huh.
And so when you think about Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show,
Yeah.
I'm not sure he was in that show, but he was a competitor. And
Yeah.
he was known to be one of the best trick shots in the United States and had his own shows. And they had like a machine. I can't remember what it's called, but it would shoot glass orbs.
Glass ball.
Yeah,
balls.
Yeah. He shot 993 out of 1,000.
That's insane.
I mean, to be there for 1,000 shots, I'm like, oh,
I know, right?
Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff that we focus on now. And it doesn't just have to be military as far as firearms are concerned.
Yeah.
And so because of that, and because the surplus was drying up, because the internet gave us a whole lot more flexibility on, you didn't have to have a little spot in a paper publication of what you're advertising anymore that costs money, or print a paper catalog. So are you really going to take a space up for one item, or do you want surplus? Because we can do unlimited items on the internet, that's how the business shifted. So now we release 180 new one-of-a-kind items every week. So that's almost 10,000 items a year. And they range from...
And that's photography, write-up, copy, the whole...
Yep. So I have 16 employees. I have 4 full-time gunsmiths, 2 full-time photographers. They take about between 2,000 and 2,500 fully edited images a week. Because on a gun like that, we're taking 25 images of all the nooks and crannies and the markings and everything else. The gunsmiths go over that, all the guns, to make sure that they're functional, that they're in the best condition they can be, make sure that there's no active rusting or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And if there are parts that need to be replaced, we'll swap them if we can, or we'll make them. My guys are working in the back right now on a Kerr revolver, which is a really rare revolver made in London at the time of the Civil War. The Confederates imported a lot of them, but they made fewer than 1,000, and the trigger spring's broken. Well, we can't order one. And they're trying to make this tiny little spring out of sprung steel and heat it and temper it, and it keeps breaking. And I'm like, come on, please make it work, please. And so those are those are the fun and the challenges. And we ship about 125 orders a day. So it shows how, like your analogy of like the wild animals in Florida, actually this hobby and collecting antique guns and collecting military is actually pretty broad.
Right.
We have a lot of interest in it. Our website gets about almost 400,000 unique visitors a month. And
a month. Wow, that's amazing.
And it's not just, we don't get that many orders. As I said, we get about 125 orders a day, but it's people researching and just learning about history. And so I have a research department of 3 people, and their responsibility is to not just, this is an easier one because we've got a letter from the Cody Museum, but sometimes many times you don't. So you have to figure out, what is this? When was it used? What condition is it in? And, all the relevant facts. And then we try to add historical context as well.
So this is fascinating. Like I have so many questions. I guess I won't be able to ask them all, but this is the one I want to ask first, I think, is how important is it that these, particularly the weapons, the firearms notably, like, are functional? Like, and how do you know if they're functional? I mean, I would imagine a lot of the stuff your gunsmiths can kind of suss out, but like, do people want operational or operating firearms? Is that where the value is, essentially?
So I get a lot of heat for this because I'll go on Pawn Stars and be like, well, I'd really like to fire it before I give it a value. Now that's for TV, right? Like, I don't need to fire something to know what it's worth. However, do you want to own an antique car that doesn't run?
Right.
I mean, that's my feeling about it. I have these gunsmiths. Now, 1, they're working on the Nepal guns too, because we get orders and they have to fix those up anyway. But 2, it's one of the things, it's a value add that we have, because I have a full machine shop, that other dealers can't compete with. So I can go into a gun show and I can buy a single action Army Colt revolver that's really in great condition, but the cylinder doesn't rotate, and I know I can get it fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I
Mm-hmm.
can buy it for less, go, hey, I can get this fixed properly and I can sell it for more.
Mm-hmm.
So while we don't, and for liability reasons, and, we don't advertise, yeah, go out and shoot it. In fact, we say don't shoot it. But if you want to shoot it, it's mechanically sound, but just make sure you have somebody who knows what they're doing, like a qualified gunsmith, test it first.
Right.
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 But yes, in general terms, I don't want to sell a broken gun.
Yeah. And then in terms of like the scarcity and rarity of some of these pieces, more in the not so much in the big lots, but in the more current
Yeah.
style of business that you're doing now. When stuff is super rare, when you're going to determine value on something, I mean, this is something that I've dealt with a little bit in the gun sales at Orvis, and totally different but similar concept is that where we find the true value of a gun, like someone goes and buys a Purdy or something, and they spent, I'm just making up numbers here,
Yeah.
but someone goes and spends $100,000 and gets a bespoke Purdy, and then they go to sell it, and they're in their mind, oh, it's a Purdy, oh, it was bespoke, it cost me $100,000, therefore it's worth 120. And then you have to say, well, it's got weird dimensions and it's got this and it's got this, so it's actually worth like 30 maybe. Let's see what, and they don't want to hear that, and so on and so forth. And then basically what the proof in the pudding winds up being is what something will go for at auction. It's like, what is the greater demand of the market saying that this is worth? So in the case of your stuff where you're selling stuff at retail, obviously some of this stuff is super esoteric. Like, how do you even come up with values on things? Like,
well, look, so one of a very good case in point is we went to the antique gun show in Baltimore, and if people haven't been there, it's in the spring. It's the best antique gun show in the world. It's incredible. I love going there. And my father fell in love with a wheel lock pistol made about 1600. And I know the dealer who has it. And I said, hey, Chip, how much is this? And he goes, oh, it's $60,000. And I was like, where the heck?
Right.
Where are you getting that? He's like, look at it.
Right.
It's gilt. It's got a carved barrel, it's got the Mars on the barrel and all these things. And he's right. It's stag inlay. I mean, it is a work of art, no question. It was owned by the Van Roth collection. They had it in the 1800s. It was sold through Christie's 40 years ago, for 15,000 pounds, and that's this and that's that. And I was like, Chip, come on, man. Like, what are we going to do here? And I bought it, right? Because my dad wanted it, and we'll probably try to sell it. I guess part of that is the instinct that you have, or I've developed, and I think that's what my father has always been really good at. He understands what appeals to people, what they like. And I thankfully got that too. And so there are things I can just look at and I know what I can sell it for. But the bespoke modern gun market is something, it's interesting. Our inventory pretty much appreciates every year because we know what to buy, and we are selling things that we sold 20 years ago, right? Like we sold it 20 years ago and we're buying it back now at much more, and we know we're going to sell it for more later.
Yeah.
You have seen softness in the collectible market. I mean, the guys who got heavy in the Civil War in the 90s, they're all taking a bath now, but it was overinflated. And you've seen that a little bit with some World War II stuff now. And a lot of that is driven, well, it's generational, number one. And number two, it's driven a little bit by the entertainment industry, a little bit. So those huge World War II blockbusters, Saving Private Ryan, which we did a lot of the machine guns and weapons for, Band of Brothers, so I grew up with that, right? Those were late 90s. Like I remembered, love those films. And so airborne stuff went through the roof because of it. And it's still pretty high, but I think in 10 or 15 years, like my son who's 14, he hasn't seen it. I don't know what the demand's going to be. And that was sort of a little bit with like the Civil War stuff. And so, but firearms, antique firearms, they have really been a pretty darn good investment over time. If you don't, as long as you kind of know what you're doing and you buy it from a place that, we'll certify like everything we sell, and I have to do this, is guaranteed for life. I mean,
Hmm.
if we sell you something fake and you call me in 20 years and they have some new test that determined that, yes, this metallurgy was 100 years after I said it was, I will buy it back at what you paid for it. Because
Hmm.
if you don't do that, I just kind of feel like there's just too much, you're too, I think some people get burned out there from dealers who, um, not, maybe they're not intentionally doing it. I think many dealers we've made mistakes. I mean, there's
Right.
nobody in this business who hasn't made a mistake. But you have to kind of stand by what you buy, because then people will trust you to buy more, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
So
Similar along the lines of the scarcity and rarity. So shifting a bit to like Pawn Stars as an example, and I know it's TV, and I know some of that stuff is, but there's probably some maneuvering behind the scenes. But do these treasures show up in like grandpa's attic or at a pawn shop, or maybe if you have any stories of real treasures or real collectibles that just emerge from the weirdest of places?
yeah, I mean, they show up all the time. There is stuff in people's homes right now that it's worth tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they have no idea.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I have two full-time buyers, and I buy stuff too, but I don't travel as much anymore because of my family. But I have two guys who just travel all over the country and sometimes the world trying to buy stuff. And we buy it from, I mean, the best thing you can do as far as like from a business perspective is go in and buy a personal collection.
Mm-hmm.
Give them a lot of money for a lot of stuff, and then your margin is better.
Mm-hmm.
But we also go to the auctions, and we also go to gun shows, and we also go to military shows, and we go to pawn shops, and there are, and we have what we call like pickers, who are people that we're friends with and buy stuff, and they will go and to their local swap meet and find stuff and say, hey, I found this, and they're sending us photos like, is it authentic, or how do you tell? Yes, buy it. Okay, we'll give you this
Right.
for it.
Right.
A really cool thing that I found, and it was essentially, it was in a private collection, but they weren't really intending to collect it. It had been given to them by like a friend of their uncle, and it was a painted leather flight jacket from World War II. So the pilots and the crewmen of these bombers, B-17s, B-24s, not all of them, but traditionally they would have nose art, and they would name their plane. If you've seen the film Memphis Belle, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Okay.
Sure.
So this particular jacket had the 8th Air Force insignia painted on the back, and it had a name. Actually, it didn't have normally they have a name tape. It didn't have the name tape. It had a patch. From the patch, I could tell what squadron it was, right? So it was 8th Air Force, but I could tell what squadron. And in the back of the jacket, there was a name, and someone had written the name on a piece of paper. So when I bought it from this family, they had handed me the paper and said, this is the person's name on it. I said, okay. And I, came back to my office, typed it in. I'm like, we have a way, we have different databases that we look through, and we have subscriptions, and you can also go to the National Archives. I could not find this name. I just couldn't find it. So I'm looking at it more and more. I'm like, wait a minute. And I look back at where it's written in the jacket. I was like, whoever did this misspelled it. So I retranscribed the name, put it into one of my databases, and boom, I found the guy. And not only did I find the guy, I found his whole story. And he had been in a B-17 flying over northern Germany, and they got hit by flak, and they were really, really damaged. And so one of the things they do is they get all the equipment off the plane. So they're dropping everything out. Anything that is not bolted down, that isn't necessary to fly, they're getting it off because they want to conserve fuel. So the lighter they are, the easier it is to fly and glide. They try to make their way to Sweden. So they're over now the ocean, past northern Germany, and they are just hoping. They're limping, and they can see the Swedish shore as they're coming down. And right as they get over the land, the co-pilot, and this is all from this guy's story on a website basically devoted to him and the guys on the crew.
Mm-hmm.
And the captain's like, we're bailing out, go tell the crew, but it's too loud. So the co-pilot comes through the back and he's going like this, and for whatever reason the two flak gunners misunderstood and they didn't get out of the plane. They didn't jump. So they burrow down, everyone else is off, and the plane is just gliding. And it glides down literally like 3 miles from the coast. They just got into Sweden, and it lands in a field, and it lands like perfectly.
Really?
It does not explode. The guys get up. Where is everybody? Those bastards left us.
Right.
All the Sweden, the people from the village come out on their bicycles and da-da-da. The other guys had parachutes and they've landed. They all collect in the village. These guys stayed in Sweden. There was no way for them to get out for the duration of the war. Like
Really?
5 or 6 of them marry Swedish girls. There's photos of them in tuxedos. They put on plays in the local theater. One of them opened a restaurant. Like they completely became like members of this little village. And there is a website out there devoted to these guys from this crew. And they find a picture of the guy whose jacket I have in his jacket before the crash. And that was like, I just remember, unspooling all that and being like, oh my gosh, like this is incredible.
Yeah. Huh. And so where did the jacket, like what all did you, I assume
I sold it. I mean, I put on the website. I had this whole story. I did email the website, who I could figure out, like, ran it. We never got a response. And I don't know when that website was built, right? Sure. It could have been up for 15 years. But there is, I mean, many people, and this happens quite a bit, people whose family members see things that were named that we sell will contact us and say, that was my grandfather's. Like, how did you get it? And the one way we didn't get it is we didn't run into your grandfather's closet and steal it. Right. It was undoubtedly given to Salvation Army, or it was sold by one of your relatives, or whatever it was. I mean, it's awful. And so we have a process. We have like a form email that we say, we're really sorry to hear this. We will assist you any way we can. Since we've sold it, all we can do is contact the buyer and see if they'd be willing to have you contact them. We can't give you their information, but we will try. And once in a while that works out.
Yeah.
Usually people are contacting us because they see what it's sold for and they go, oh, I missed out on a payday. Right. And chances are a relative sold it 20 years or 30 years ago, and there was no payday for it then because it wasn't as collectible. Right. But yeah, it's so to answer your question, there's still a lot out there. It's just not in giant government surplus depots. It's in people's attics and basements. And the United States is rife with military collectibles, mostly because U.S. soldiers are basically one of the only militaries that are allowed to have war booty, essentially. They're allowed to have things that they find. They're not allowed to loot, but, they can bring back a helmet from the enemy. They can bring back medals or uniforms. And so there's a whole supply system set up for American military to bring things back. Even when they were in Afghanistan, the soldiers could go to the local bazaar, buy an antique gun, and there was a way to ship it back to themselves.
Oh, really?
And they get bring back certificates and everything. That's why there's so much here. So during World War II, I mean, if you saw, I think it's Band of Brothers, it might be Saving Private Ryan. There's literally a scene where one of the guys is like, I want to get a Luger. Look at all the watches I have, and they're bringing them home, and then they sit in Foot Lockers for 60 years, and then the grandkids come in and go, I don't want any of this, but it's got to be worth something, and then we go in and buy it.
Yeah. Wow, fascinating. It's it feels like the threads of this are the individual stories of different items or whatever else. You could go on and on forever. I want to be respectful of time, but I have a couple other quick questions. And I think this would be, I want to end with a little more about you, just you personally. But I want to ask one last kind of gun military related question. Have you ever had a situation where I'm going to how should I stage this question? I have been in situations being around firearms where you will stumble upon something, for example, in a gun shop or at a gun show or something, and it'll be like one of those crazy situations where you know pick up a gun, open the action, and realize there's a live round in there that you just like didn't even know was there. You must encounter. I mean, we were dealing with tens of thousands of. Do you ever get scary situations where you're like, "Holy smokes, this is a loaded cannon that I didn't know," whatever like that?
Yeah, especially with the stuff from Nepal because it was put away, not a lot, but every 100 guns. So we have a whole process with the gunsmiths before we start working on one of the Nepal guns. Like we have a worm, we make sure we measure the length of the barrel to make sure there's not a round in there. And this is all black powder stuff, and most of it's muzzle loading. If it's breech loading, you can tell, hey, there's a brass casing in here. It's loaded. But specifically with a cannon, it actually was like a few months. I actually have a video of it. So we had a bronze howitzer. So the definition of a howitzer versus a mortar. So it's like a big fat little, cannon, but it doesn't have wheels. It's usually on a stationary mount. So a howitzer has the trunnions in the middle. A mortar has them on the bottom. So we had a howitzer, and they were used during the Revolutionary War, the Napoleonic Wars. Civil War had howitzers as well. And we could see that there was a ball in there, and we could not get it out. And this thing, it was like a huge diameter, almost 12 inches, and a massive bronze. I mean, a couple thousand pounds this thing was. And, it's dicey to sell it like that because very likely there's a whole bunch of black powder underneath, and you don't want to sell somebody a ticking time bomb. So I'm going, what do we do? What do we do? And I have this great guy, John Roundtree, who for shooters, especially the guys in the NSSA, that's the North-South Skirmish Association, so they get together multiple times a year around the country and shoot Civil War guns. This guy's a legend, and he lives locally, and we become good friends. And John's my first call, especially when I have to shoot something crazy on Pawn Star. I was like, how are we going to do this? Like, can you make me this ammo? He's like, yeah, I could do it. So I called John, I'm like, we got a problem. This thing is loaded. And he comes up, he goes, oh, okay. So we pour muriatic acid in it, let it sit for a month. Then we hang it upside down on one of our forklifts. Then we basically put a worm into the ball, and we've got a truck, and we're trying to pull it. Nothing is happening. Yeah. And he goes, you know what we got to do? I was like, what? He's like, we got to take it down on the range, and we're going to put black powder through the touch hole, and I'm going to put a fuse in there, and we are going to see if it blows itself out. Now, you can do this with bronze. You cannot do this with iron. Iron will shatter. It'll break like that. But bronze is much softer. It's very malleable. So it'll fail, but it fails in a totally different way. It'll crack, it'll expand.
But you're also cognizant of the fact that if this goes sideways, you're going to destroy the...
Yeah, I am. But I don't think it will.
Right.
So we do this, and the first time it goes... Pfft, and nothing happens. I'm like, oh, come on. And John's like, we need more black powder. So we're like making this tiny little funnel out of paper, getting it in. I'm like, I think it's full. He goes, I think you can get a little more. I think it's full. Get it in, stick the fuse in, light it. I mean, running hundreds of yards away to try to get away from the, any possible parameter of failure. And boom. I mean, the cannonball comes out, and then just like black soot and probably old gunpowder, which was too rotten to ignite, just follows it like mud all the way out. And the ball goes maybe 50 feet, and everyone's cheering, tons of smoke. And now it's clear, and the thing was totally fine.
Really?
Yeah. I have a video of it. It's so funny.
That's crazy. And what is that, just out of curiosity, like, what do you think that cannonball weighed? Like, it must have weighed...
probably like 30 pounds.
Okay, so not
20 pounds. I mean, not huge. I mean, but they're maybe 40 pounds, but big.
Big.
I mean, that's big for a cannonball.
Yeah, that's insane. Okay, so pivoting a little bit, and again, being just respectful of time, but you had this other sort of parallel experience or early experience where you weren't interested in firearms, and you were actually a competitive skier, and then you got into acting. So, like, just love to hear a little bit about that backstory. Like, how did you get started skiing? How did your dad wind up in the States in the first place? How did,
Yeah. So
kind of all that come to be?
it's I was a very lucky kid. So my dad came to the United States on business, and he met the guy who ran Sarco, and that guy's wife was friends with my mom, and they brought him on a blind date, like to go out to dinner, and my dad met my mom, and then 3 months later, even though he lived in England, they got married. And then a year later, I came along.
Mm-hmm.
But when I grew up, I was a really like hyper kid. And I liked playing baseball and I liked playing soccer, but I didn't like basketball for whatever reason. And that was the winter sport. And in New Jersey, if you're not going to play basketball in the early 80s, it's like, well, I don't know what you're going to do. And my brother, who's my half brother, my mother had been divorced, who's 12 years older, started taking me to the local ski area. And I really liked it. And it was, I'd come home like just so tired and go to bed. And my mom's like, this is awesome.
Right.
Like,
right.
The kid's like never been so manageable. And so I would go up every weekend with my brother. And then my brother was off to college, and there was a ski racing program that started at the mountain. And my mom signed me up, and I would go every Saturday and Sunday. And then that turned into Saturday and Sunday. And I got special permission to leave at noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays from school so I could do afternoon and night training. And when I was like 11 or 12 maybe, I qualified for the Junior Olympics, which sounds really impressive, but it really is not that big a deal. They have Junior Olympics like in 8 different regions of the United States. So I qualified for the Eastern one. And I was like the only New Jersey skier. And I go up, and it's in Vermont. And I do the slalom and giant slalom, and I get last in the slalom, and I get third to last in the giant slalom. I was awful, but I loved it. I was like, this is so cool. And I was going up the lift with some of the kids from Vermont, and they were talking about a school you could go to where you would ski every day, and you only had classes half a day. And I don't even think I asked them what it was. And then I figured it out that it was this place called Burke Mountain Academy. And I went home and I did another season, and I knew that my father would never let me go to boarding school because he hated going to boarding school. He was forced to go to a boarding school, and he felt like he never had as close a relationship with his father because of it. And then his father died when he was basically finished being boarding school. And so I asked my 8th grade English teacher, I told her what I wanted to do and that I wanted to apply, and I didn't want to tell my parents. And she was like, look, I'll help you, but you have to pay $50 or $25 as an application fee. I was like, well, yeah, just loan me the money. She was like, no,
right.
I gotta write a check. Like, let's do the application. Let's show your parents what you've done and that you want to send it, and see if they'll give you the money. And so I did all the application stuff, wrote the essays, got all my transcript together, brought it to my parents. And they were like, what are you going to do? Your 12-year-old kid brings you this. Like, you're not going to let him.
Right,
and so they let me. And I don't think that they thought anything would really come of it. Next thing you know, Burke calls and was like, we really like to interview him. So my father had to leave. He was buying stuff around the world, and my mom took me up. And it was great. I mean, I loved it. I hit it off with the headmaster. And we get in the car. My mom starts tearing up. I'm like, what's wrong? She was like, you're going to break your father's heart coming here. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, you're going to get in, and he is going to be so devastated that you're going to be here. But it's a great place. You should go to school here. And it was more than, it was a ski academy, but it was really a lot. And I'm so glad I went, because I was entitled and spoiled and had never really worked at anything, and that place completely stripped me of all that crap and showed me that hard work paid off. I was the worst ski racer going in. By the time I left, I was pretty damn good. I raced Division I in college, and all of that came from, you couldn't buy that. You just had to work at it. And that's what I did. And so that was like, that got me through adolescence and into college. And then when I went to college, I was kind of tired of skiing because I'd taken 2 years in between high school and college and raced internationally.
Yeah, and I have to ask, just to, so Patrick Connors, my other buddy who went to Burke with you, he said he thought you had raced on the England. Did you race on
I
England's
did.
national team? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I raced on the British national team. So when I was like 16, I could declare my citizenship. I'm a dual citizen, but for skiing, you could do one or the other,
Hmm.
and you couldn't switch back. And I wasn't going to make the U.S. ski team. Certainly when I was 16, I never thought I would. And so I raced on the British national team, and that's why I was in Europe for those 2 years. And then I went to Middlebury College, which had an outstanding ski team, Division One. Andrew went to UVM, and so we were friends then as well.
Hmm.
And I did 2 years at Middlebury skiing, and I did the carnivals and saw what that was like. But part of going to a liberal arts college is they make you take classes in other things, other disciplines that you're not exposed to. And one of them for the arts requirement was I decided to take an acting class. And I took acting one with like the head of the department. And part of that class is you had to audition for like the next show, right? It was just part of the class. Like you didn't
Hmm.
have to be cast or anything. You just had to see what an audition was like. So it was a visiting director. Like they had brought in a director from New York City. And so he didn't know anybody. Like he didn't know the students. He didn't know who was a theater major. He doesn't know what an actor or not an actor, whatever. And so I went in and I auditioned, and the next thing you know, they cast me in the play. And I was like, what? What does that mean? And I went to go meet my acting teacher who was the head of the department. I was like, I'm a skier. I don't have time for this. He's like, no, it's okay. We talked to your coach. I was like, you talked to my coach? He's like,
All
yeah,
right.
no conflict. It's not going to be a conflict. The day you have to have carnivals, like, you're out of rehearsal, and then it's a spring show. Like it's no conflict at all. I was like, yeah, but I have classes. He's like, well, this is a class. I was like, whoa, I get credit for that.
All
He's like,
right.
yeah. I was like, let's do it.
Yeah.
And I wound up quitting the ski team and became a theater major. I
Really?
loved
That's
it.
amazing.
It
Yeah.
was like athletics. It really was. Preparing for a show, rehearsing, doing up and doing live performance. And the Middlebury Theater Department was really, really good. And I wasn't alone. I mean, there were other athletes who were in the theater department as well. And so I had like this great group of friends. And I still was friends with all the skiers, but and I'd done it for 2 years, and I'd spent my life doing it. And now I was doing theater, and that wound up me I got out of school. I did a national tour out of the Kennedy Center. We did Julius Caesar and A Few Good Men. I did it like in 30 states, and we trucked around, and it was really fun. And then I went to graduate school in San Diego for acting at UCSD La Jolla Playhouse. I got out of that after 3 years, and I did what they call a showcase in New York City. I got an agent, and then I worked for 20 years as an actor, and that's what brought me to New York. And that's when I was like, well, I don't want to be a bartender. I'll just,
Right.
set up this website for my dad. And it was great. I mean, I have now sort of, I wouldn't say retired, but I've taken a break from acting because this has gotten so busy. Pawn Stars is sort of acting too, and I'm on camera a ton, and so. But I never did act. I could care less about being famous. Like that's not. I don't do Pawn Stars to be famous. I don't care if people recognize me. I just want to promote my business. I mean, that's
Hmm.
really why the only and it's fun. I mean, I
Right.
genuinely enjoy what I do, and I think people see that because I really like firing these guns. I really like talking about their history. I find them fascinating, and I like people understanding, like the especially with the firearms. I mean, it's a mix of technology and art.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, no, it's really true. And I imagine too, just now, it's an interesting complementary background in that you kind of understand the acting world, probably the Hollywood scene to a degree, and
yeah,
then also that you can interface with that and sort of understand it from that side, working with movie sets and movie,
yep.
Production and so on and so forth. So yeah, really, I just had to get that in there because I think that is a fascinating element of your story, and again, as we said from the beginning, just that there is this piece of you bringing a celebration of, or an interest in, or just curiosity about antique firearms to the the main stage, if you will, and sort of
Yeah.
network TV. So pretty wild. Well, I do, as I said, want to be respectful of time. Alex, thank you so much. If people want to learn more about IMA or about you, or the IMA website is really great, and there's clips to Pawn Stars and so on and so forth. But what's the best way for them to see what you've got, see what you're doing, learn more about what you're up to?
So our website, the company is International Military Antiques. The website is ima-usa.com. And we release about 200 items a week. So we have an email newsletter, an SMS newsletter that we send out 3 times a week showing the new stuff we just listed. We have over almost 350,000 subscribers to those newsletters that go worldwide. So some of the best stuff sells literally within seconds. Sometimes it's phenomenal. And we have all different kinds of military history. So really, if you are at all interested in military history going back 200 years, 2,000 years, we have usually something, somewhere in between. Yeah.
That's amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. Do stay on the line. I want to catch up on a few other items after we stop recording. But for listeners, I know this was a bit of a departure, but I thought this was just such a fascinating story. I really was excited to get Alex on here talking about the business, talking about military history, talking about old firearms, talking about Pawn Stars and all the things. So I really do. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Remember, reach out with questions, comments, and thoughts to me at huntingpodcast@orvis.com. That's the best way to weigh in on what you're thinking about the content that we're producing. And also remember to rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you listen on. So Alex, once again, stay on the line, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Reed. I enjoyed it.
Awesome.